Okay guys, in this video we're going to go through isometric testing for the knee and just around the lower limb. We're going to do some hip stuff as well because we always find that that's really important when it comes to knee pain if someone has come in and they've got knee issues. So, if we get Patrick onto the bed, I'm going to come around the back actually and do this on this side. Essentially we want to just test flexion extension. I tend to, and again different people will think about this in different ways, but I tend to not worry too much. Obviously, you know, flexion is going to be using his hamstrings, quads for extension, but especially when you start getting into the external internal rotation of the hip and those sorts of movements, there are lots of little muscles and lots of things that are going to help do that movement. I think it's more personally easier just to think of it as whether it's weak or whether it's not weak in comparison to their other side. So you're just really comparing left versus right and just seeing whether you think that it feels weaker on one side in that movement. So knee flexion, knee extension, and then we'll go through the hip ones. So for knee extension, I've just come onto the top, just stabilising his femur, and then just say, Patrick, don't let me move you, and then just pushing down towards the floor. So that's knee extension or isometric knee extension. Obviously you could do this as well in different ranges. So if you had an issue when someone was at a certain point in running strike, so if they were, especially with running, you might want to test it up here because again that might be different to when you test it in this position. Similarly, if they're getting into more of a squatted position, you might want to say just nice and relaxed. You might want to test it in more of this position because again that's going to be more relevant to a deep squat, for example. So you can test it through different ranges. Then obviously for hamstrings, just again underneath this time, so be flexion and holding and saying don't let me move you, just pushing up towards the ceiling. And again I'm just really gauging if there's any weakness there and always comparing that from right to left. So then for your hip, again you can do a quick hip flexion, so just hold, don't let me move you, and then you can go into your I like to do abduction, adduction with a long lever because I think it's easier to gauge, but you could quite easily do that in a short lever position. So in this position, don't let me move you across, good, and don't let me move you out. So you've got your abduction, adduction just in that position. Again, similar thing to the knee flexion and extension, you're doing it through different ranges which can be helpful. So for isometric, internal rotation and external rotation is always a bit of a funny one because you essentially it's kind of the opposite of the actual movement that you're doing. So if, for example, if you're bringing Patrick into what would we consider to be an external rotation position and then I say resist, don't let me move you, it's an isometric internal rotation. Whereas when I bring him into more of that internally rotated position and say don't let me move you, it would be more of an external isometric position. So you're going into the opposite of what you're actually testing for in terms of that isometric movement. And then again, you can do that in different ranges. So you can bring it down into this range. Again, you were talking a minute ago about how different ranges you can tend to preferentially look at different muscles.
Yeah, I think a major one that we try and identify is often piriformis, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Not so much necessarily for the knee, but there's always a bit of confusion as to what piriformis does depending on its range.
Yeah.
So if you take it out of that flex position and then resist external rotation, then you know you're isolating piriformis, and if you wanted to confirm that, you would palpate as well to add into that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And then again, adduction and abduction, I tend to just come in, bring across into an abducted, slight abducted position, again kind of mid-range, and then just say don't let me move you, and then relax. And then same thing with adduction, don't let me move you, and relax. So again, you can easily with those slightly bias that as well. You can with when you're in this position, Glenn and I were talking about this before as well, just bring it out into a slight abducted position. Not so as relevant with the knee, but if you've got a hip patient, then you might not want to bring them into that position because that could cause a bit of impingement. So you may be getting a bit of weakness due to pain inhibition rather than necessarily because of muscular strength deficits. So I think just bringing it out into that position of kind of 20 degrees or so abduction just means that you're going to hopefully be reducing the chance of that impingement position, and then you can assess their strength better. So that is a quick isometric test of the knee to check to see if there's any strength discrepancies from right to left.